Thank you for coming along to this session. It's getting towards the end of the week, so there's a bit of fatigue, I think. So we are in the session that's on building data platforms to reduce inequities. My name's Professor Helen Thompson. I'm from Queensland University of Technology, just across the river in the School of Mathematical Sciences and the Centre for Data Science. So it's my pleasure to chair this session today. This session's within the conference theme of empowering the global data community for impact, equity and inclusion. So today's session is focusing on how data platforms, whether they're in health or the environment or in other domains, can be designed to and used to identify inequities and to help target actions to reduce those inequities. Now, before we begin, before we begin, I'll just like to acknowledge that we are presenting here today on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbals people and pay respects to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. And we'll see some maps today that span across other lands of our Indigenous peoples, as well as the Netherlands. So we've got excellent lineup of speakers today. We will have Dr. Jessica Cameron first. She is the Senior Research Fellow and Group Lead of Understanding Cancer Inequities at Cancer Council Queensland. And her presentation is alongside Hasan Alradhi, who is the Scientific Programmer for Netherlands Comprehensive Cancer Organisation. Hasan will have his presentation component pre-recorded through some slides, and together they will be presenting on the Australian and Dutch cancer atlases. We then have Dr. Aiden Price, who is a Senior Research Associate, Centre for Data Science and School of Mathematical Sciences, also my colleague at Queensland University of Technology. He's also the Environmental Health Domain Specialist in the Australian Urban Research Infrastructure Network, and he'll be presenting an Australian Environmental Health Project. That will be followed by Associate Professor Susanna Cramb, who is the Principal Research Fellow at the Australian Centre for Health Services Innovation and the School of Public Health and Social Work, also at Queensland University of Technology, different campus to the maths school, so it almost feels like it's a different university. She's also a biostatistician for the Jamison Trauma Institute for Metro North Health and Hospital Services in our local region. And she will be presenting on the Queensland Injury Atlas, and then we'll end with Dr. James Retell, who is the Senior Research Officer for Reporting and Communications at Cancer Council Australia, and he will be presenting an R-Shiny application called CARDO. Also like to just acknowledge that we did originally have some additional speakers, and unfortunately they were unavailable to attend, so we will no longer have a presentation from Dr. Aswi and Dr. Daminda Solangaarachchi. So each presentation will run for around 10 minutes, and following that we'll have about a 30-minute panel discussion, and that will be moderated by my colleague Professor Gentry White down the front here, who is also with me in the School of Mathematical Sciences and Centre of Data Science at Queensland University of Technology. And that panel will explore some themes on designing platforms to identify inequities, data security and trust. A bit closer, sorry, thank you. And how we translate data platforms into impact. If you have any questions, I encourage you to enter them into the virtual platform for the conference or the conference app, and we'll open the floor for discussion during that panel session. So if we can please get started and join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Jessica Cameron. Apologies. There is a slide one here if you want that.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you very much, Helen, and thanks everyone for coming along this morning. I'm Jess Cameron, I'm from Cancer Council Queensland, and this morning I'll talk about data equity and the Australian Cancer Atlas. I need to be close to the microphone. How's that? Is that Can you hear me up the back? Okay. I'll try this one. That's much, okay, great. So the Australian Cancer Atlas is interested in data equity on 3 levels. I've lost my place. I should say that the Australian Cancer Atlas is an online platform that's freely available and that allows people to explore disparities in cancer across Australia. So the 3 levels that we are interested in equity are, firstly, our primary goal is to improve cancer outcomes across Australia, and that includes improving equity in cancer outcomes. Secondly, we're interested in making this data available to everyone. So it's been carefully designed so that everyone can access the data and use the data. And this is crucial for making sure everyone can advocate for health equity in their area. And finally, our team has produced materials so that anyone across the world can, with good health data, can produce a health atlas. So let's drill down into those a little bit more. How can the Australian Cancer Atlas achieve equitable outcomes? Well, the maps and data in the atlas give local insights into cancer disparities, and this provides an evidence base for locally targeted or geographically targeted strategies to prevent cancers, to enable earlier detection of cancers so that more people are able to survive the cancer or survive longer, and so that more options are available to people, including less invasive or aggressive treatments. There we go. So how is the information available to everyone? Firstly, the maps are freely available online. Secondly, the visualizations are also readily understood by a wide range of stakeholders. So this map here shows liver cancer diagnosis rates for each area of Australia compared with the Australian average. So areas that are red have high rates compared to the Australian average, and areas that are blue have low rates compared to the Australian average. So it's very intuitive, and users of the atlas include members of the community who have no experience in geospatial information or even in the quantitative sciences. The colour palette is colourblind friendly, so it's very inclusive. And the interface also provides additional information. So at the bottom of every page, this text appears telling users exactly what's in the map. So liver cancer diagnosis rates. There's also, if you select an area, there's an explanation of what the results for that area mean. So it gives a point estimate, 23% above average, and it gives a measure of uncertainty. So it says it's likely to be a real difference. The Australian Cancer Atlas is a data repository, but we've worked hard to make sure that the data is more available than just as a data repository. So, for example, through active cooperation with the media, through publications in academic literature, through conferences and social media, we've made sure the atlas is not only findable, but it's also well known and well regarded. The visualizations are accessible in a machine-readable format. They can be downloaded, but also we've made them accessible through the visualizations shown on the previous slide. We've also got some explainers developed by experts in communication and digital storytelling that explain different aspects of the atlas. It's interoperable because we use freely available geography standards, standard terminology and disease classifications, and we also have detailed definitions on the website. And the data downloads and the website also include licensing information so that the data are reusable. So the third thing was open science. On the left there, you can see this graph comes from a review of spatial studies in cancer survival. And you can see most of the studies come from high-income countries. Now, availability of raw data is an obstacle to many countries or many areas producing health atlas or spatial analyses. But access to skills and software is also an obstacle. So our team has produced this ebook that explains the methods and how to evaluate them. This has opened the door to collaborations for us, but more importantly, it's advanced cancer research worldwide because people across the world have used this ebook. So I've made a lot of claims about the atlas, but now I'd like to demonstrate the effectiveness and impact of our approach. The atlas has had a significant impact across policy, research, education, and so on. But I'll just focus on a few examples today. And the first one is government decision-making. So rare cancers might sound like a small issue, but in fact, 1 in 3 cancer diagnoses in Australia and 1 in 4 cancer deaths is from a rare cancer. Our research found that there were strong differences in outcomes for people with rare cancers across Australia, particularly for people in remote areas. Following this research, the leads of the atlas were invited to give evidence to a Senate inquiry into rare cancers. Consequently, the Australian government has promised $7 million to improve access to expertise and services for people with a rare cancer, particularly for people living in remote areas. This is another example, and I like this example because it spans lots of different domains. So this is a paper based on atlas results about a group of blood cancers called the myeloproliferative neoplasms, or MPNs. Publishing these maps made a profound impact on the patients themselves who'd been diagnosed with a cancer they'd never heard of before, but was now literally put on the map. They then took these results and used them in their advocacy work. For example, they used them in developing the patient care guidelines that clinicians use when they're treating patients. The results have also been used as evidence by cancer registries to motivate investment to improve their data collection practices. In this paper, actually a letter to an editor of a top clinical journal, a doctor or a haematologist, implores her colleagues to follow international best practice and uses the atlas as evidence that this is not occurring. And finally, down the bottom here, others have done research to try to understand these differences. And we know that people in the US and the UK have sought to replicate our work, or to see if there's similar differences in their jurisdictions. Other users of the atlas include community groups. So in this example, there was a committee from Rotary who used the atlas to find areas of Australia where bowel cancer survival was poorest. They then went to these areas and held events, engaged with people, with the public, and encouraged people to participate in bowel cancer screening. And wherever they went, they used the statistics from the atlas to make it personal, to demonstrate the poorer outcomes in that area. So by providing those local statistics, it makes it more personal so that people understand that they need to do more for their health, more than seems normal for themselves or for their areas. And here's another couple of examples of health organisations using atlas data. On the right, this is a brochure that Movember sent to every Australian Member of Parliament about prostate cancer statistics. And on the left, we have a report about a related condition, viral hepatitis. We also know that the atlas is used by state health departments and local health services in their planning and resourcing. So what's next for the Australian Cancer Atlas? Well, we are aiming to include additional measures in the atlas that will help with that knowledge translation and impact. So we've described the disparities quite clearly, but we're yet to motivate the broad-scale change we need to reduce the inequities across the board. The differentials are currently expressed in relative terms. So, for example, here in South Brisbane, survival is 12% better than the Australian average. Epidemiologically, that's interpretable. But what does the health minister make of that? It's very hard to understand what 12% better means. So we believe that providing more tangible estimates of the impact of these disparities will help motivate action. So in this study, we asked, if we reduced those spatial disparities in survival, how many lives could be saved? And we found that 34,000 lives could be saved by reducing those disparities. That's 12% of cancer deaths could be avoided. And in remote areas, that goes up to nearly 1 in 3 cancer deaths. And in those blue areas towards the north of Australia, that's 1 in 2 cancer deaths could be avoided if spatial disparities in survival were reduced. By demonstrating these differences in terms of the thousands of lives lost, we hope to motivate increased funding and efforts to reduce these disparities. So this article is currently in press, and we're hoping to add these measures to the atlas soon. So we've all heard of the saying, think local, act global. The atlas provides local insights so that local action can be taken. The atlas is accessible to a broad range of people so that anyone can advocate for better health in their area. And we've also made the methods publicly available so that people across the world can produce health atlases in their region. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd like to thank all the people, the dozens of people involved in this research, including our session chairs. We also need to thank the cancer registries from every state and territory of Australia and the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. I'd like to thank the generosity of the donors to the Cancer Council Queensland, the Australian Research Council, and the National Health and Medical Research Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. Just bear with me while I bring up the next part of the presentations, which is on the Dutch Cancer Atlas. And Mr. Hasan Alradhi was unable to get his visa processed in time, but has prepared a presentation with recording for us.
Since 1989, ICANN has collected...
Where's that going to? I'm not sure how to get this to play. Sorry, it's just not playing at the moment, so we're just, AV support will come up and help us with this.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron, Prof. Thompson, and the organising committee for inviting me here to speak today. I will focus on the Dutch map, its purpose, its impact in practice, and how strengthening its utility can further empower data communities to address cancer with greater equity and inclusion. Cancer communities worldwide collect and use data with a shared goal: to reduce the societal, economic, and personal burden of cancer. Together, these institutions focus on reducing the burden of disease through targeted interventions. addressing incident and survival, and improving quality of life during and following treatment. Our story centers on the first component, reducing incidence of cancer, where a spatial map conveys the reality of cancer burden far more impactfully than numbers alone ever could. Since 1989, ICANN has collected cancer incidence and mortality data through the Netherlands Cancer Registry. Trends show rising incidence and mortality, mostly explained due to cases in older age groups. With aging populations and declining birth rates across developed countries like the Netherlands, cancer places an increasing strain on healthcare systems that are already overstretched and often underfunded. Furthermore, we know that there are inequalities in cancer incidences attributed to lifestyle risk factors. Having insights into these disparities is key, and prevention is a tool to reduce differences in cancer burden. Cancer isn't distributed evenly across populations or regions. Wherever you look, there are geographic variations in incidence, and without the right tools, these differences remain hidden. Cancer atlases are designed to make these variations visible by delineating areas that depart from the norm. These atlases not only raise awareness, but also help in relating regional differences to modifiable risk factors like lifestyle and environment. Take, for instance, concentrations of high smoking rates or toxic exposures over time. Importantly, they highlight inequities, showing where the disease burden is greatest and where interventions can make a strong impact. The methods are based on the Australian Cancer Atlas approach. However, adopting these models to Dutch data poses a challenge. For instance, the Netherlands is a densely populated country. About the 889 three-digit postal code regions, there are on average 230,000 inhabitants, and 50,000 inhabitants over the fourth-digit postal code regions, ultimately culminating in 536 inhabitants per kilometre squared. As a result, spotting clusters amongst neighbouring regions can be problematic, since diverse populations often reside within the same postal code, offering an alternate problem to model development using Australian data. Here I am referring to Australian population mostly concentrating about the coastal regions. Additionally, the boundaries between regions are not always consistent. Population movements seen in gentrified neighborhoods may cause potential problems for more dynamic forms of analysis, for instance, space-time models. 4 years following the initial decision to develop it, the Dutch Cancer Atlas was launched to the public in the early hours of 17th January 2023 with much media coverage. Following the first few hours of launch, over 800,000 users engaged with the Atlas, crashing the service in the process. Alongside the maps, we provided clear explanations and documented the underlying statistics, making the Atlas not just a visual tool, but also an educational resource that helps people understand the story behind the numbers. As a result of all this publicity, Cancer Society Netherlands launched the initiative Cancer Local on the Map, aimed at providing public health municipalities with funding for projects to develop an approach for cancer prevention in their region. The amount invested has made an impact, with 6 million euros financing 10 different prevention projects to address high incidence of skin and lung cancer. Drawing on Atlas identified skin cancer hotspots along the Dutch west coast, a targeted prevention program was launched with 4 main aims: regional awareness campaigns, sunscreen dispensers, shaded infrastructure, and free sunscreen for low-income households. The initiative seeks to make sun protection a daily routine and ultimately reduce future skin cancer cases amongst these communities. The Atlas showed high lung cancer rates in West Brabant, which led to a prevention program with 2 main tracks. Firstly, a smoke-free start that helps expectant parents quit smoking during the first 1,000 days of life. And secondly, improving quit smoking support in low-income neighborhoods through tailored community-driven approaches. The program aims to break intergenerational smoking habits and make cessation services more accessible, and ultimately reduce the lung cancer incidence and mortality amongst these communities.
that has just...
Following the initial success, tackling inequalities is a new...
Geez, I'm not sure what that is.
Following the initial success, tackling inequalities is a newly established division of Cancer Community Netherlands. With version 2.0 of Cancer Local on the Map aims of embedding 3 strategic tracks for action-oriented investment. Using a more data-driven approach, the aim is to tackle inequity, unhealthy lifestyle habits, and mental health of local populations. Further development of the Dutch Cancer Atlas is essential to supporting impactful public health initiatives. By incorporating additional data, such as stage diagnosis and advancing statistical approaches with spatiotemporal models, the atlas can generate deeper insights and enable direct evaluation of policies designed to reduce disease burden. IKNL's core business rests on 3 pillars, and strengthening the pillar of support for stakeholders aligns directly with further development of the Dutch Cancer Atlas, supported by the continual evolution of the Australian Cancer Atlas. Advancing these atlases is paramount for guiding public health interventions to reduce the impact of cancer, and this strategic partnership sets a clear example for other countries to pursue development of their own atlases. Thank you very much.
That was actually quite amazing how much the Dutch Cancer Atlas had managed to kind of get in place and build on the Australian Cancer Atlas. So it's really great to see the impact that the Australian Cancer Atlas is having internationally and the progress that's being made in the Netherlands. And will take us a deviation away from the health theme and welcome Dr. Aiden Price, who will be speaking around the Australian Environmental Health Project. There's this if you want it. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen. I'll adjust this a little. So I'm going to be talking about environmental health, which still does include a little bit of health, but is now tied, I guess, to environmental hazards. I'll start by acknowledging the country or the traditional owners of the country on which we're here today, as well as where I conduct my research. It's a great honour to be able to conduct and share my work on lands that have been used for education and research. So environmental health is a national decision support platform in Australia designed to collect and present national environmental health indicators and data to support decision making and also to combat data siloing. The idea of data siloing being that researchers from all around Australia conduct localised or state-based studies, even federal studies in government and local government. And once they've done this tremendous mountain of work collating all of this data, it goes in a desk drawer or goes into a static report or paper and is never used again. And of course is then repeated by the next group doing a similar study. So Austin Health aims to combat that by collecting, preparing, processing, and presenting indicators and data in the platform directly in an interactive way and also available to the public for download. This project started in 2020 as a pilot project funded by a consortium of researchers and government around Australia. And it concluded in 2022 while we looked for funding. And I'm happy to say that we were funded again in 2024 by the National Health and Medical Research Centre through an MRFF grant. I think that's good for here. So what the pilot platform did was present indicators for environmental health data. Just to quickly summarize, an indicator, short of that sentence, really indicates things. And the purpose of an indicator is to be able to be communicable, translatable, I suppose, and to be agreed upon by people in the environmental health space as an effective representation of data. And I say here that the aim of indicators is to reduce inference burden. What I mean by that is, we'll present an example of it shortly, but if you were to just view raw data or data directly from a data custodian, that comes with a certain burden in terms of interpretation, digestion by a user, or even requirements of processing. So what we do is try to move beyond that by collating and preparing data in a way that is easily understandable. So for an example of that, we'll look at high heat days as an indicator. What we do there is take climate data from around the whole of Australia, that's at gridded level, daily data, maximum and minimum temperature. That's a visual representation of that data for a single day. You can imagine if we give 30, 40 years of climate data directly to a decision maker and say, all right, make decisions, they'll go, okay, I have no idea where to even start. And in fact, research organizations and government have to get data like this to be able to make any kind of informed decisions. So it's a problem that is very, very repeated. So what we do then is aggregate that data up. So we take the minimum and maximum, for example, create average temperature. We aggregate spatially. So instead of just grids of data, we aggregate to small area level, similar to the maps that were presented by Dr. Cameron. And then we create from that region-specific heat percentiles, because we know, for example, in Australia, there's a wide variation of temperature from the north to the south of Australia. And so we need to account for relative heat versus just pure temperature thresholds. And then we aggregate over time, exploring the number of days over certain thresholds or average historical temperature percentiles. And so the idea here is we go from a gridded map per day to an aggregated map over time, where a user can very clearly see how their indicator is changing, compare it to neighbors, etc. There are other examples of that in the platform, and I'll be quick going through them. One is green space, where one approach to generating green space would be to find land zonations in terms of retail, business, parklands, and use that to determine a percentage of a region that is designated as parkland. Another way would be to use satellite imagery or remote sensing, get daily images from Landsat or Sentinel, and use color bands to determine reflectance, and use those to determine percentage of green space, doing filters for water bodies and other things like that. Other examples are raw data that is fit for purpose. For example, median household income, which comes directly from the Australian Bureau of Statistics Australian Census. This is data that is presented at the small area level that we can just take directly in, because it already does the job of a meaningful comparison across space and time. And another example is number of heatwave days. And I mentioned this as a specific variation on the high heat days, because here, again, we're looking at relative temperature, and we're looking at the near past and comparing that to the long-term past. So there's a lot of processing that has to happen, especially considering the volume of data to determine a number of heatwave days. And you can imagine, as a decision maker, having just a data set that says, here's your number of heatwave days per year, and its comparison to regions over time, or neighbors, will be quite valuable. So we compile all of these resources together and produce it in the platform, which, I mean, is quite a value to the users of the platform. But there's a problem in collections of indicators. I say a problem because it comes of suffering from success in a way, where if we collect too many indicators, we go back to the original problem, where we're trying to present data in a quick and intuitive way so that we reduce inference burden, but now we've got 200 indicators, and so a user coming to the platform to explore extreme heat is suddenly overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. To resolve this, we've explored the creation of vulnerability indices. So these are, I guess, composite indicators or multivariate indicators, where instead of taking one source from a data custodian, we take sources from many data custodians and combine them into a single relative value across space. So here, for example, we look at 3 different aspects of population vulnerability. We look at their exposure, which is the raw temperature, or in the case of air pollution, it might be different aerosols, things like particulate matter, ozone, nitrogen dioxide. We compare that against the population statistics or population demographic data, Things like income that I mentioned earlier, number of elderly, infants, people providing unpaid childcare, unemployment, things that make a population baseline vulnerable. And then adaptive capacity, which are measures of how a population can overcome a hazard. So things like access to hospitals. In the case of heat, it might be green space or cooling centres, so places like shopping centres, ways that populations can avoid the hazard or mitigate the health impact. And so this might be a bit technical, but this is the schema, I suppose, that we use to combine all of this data. It really is just a weighted sum where we use a ranking function to standardize across all of Australia. And then we apply a pairwise weight with all-cause correlation, or sorry, with all-cause mortality, using pairwise correlation to determine the relative importance of the variables and their impact on vulnerability. So, in terms of value that we get out of that, these indicators, or indices I should say, are really tremendous in terms of value because they give that one single indicator that lets you explore, I guess, the whole domain of environment. So for extreme heat, for example, you look at the one indicator or one index and you know relative to the rest of Australia how your population is faring. We notice, though, that when you look at an index, instantly you want to know, why is my index value this high or low? And that has pros and cons, but the pro that we identified is that it acts as a lens into, I guess, a data story or an exploration story for a user. Now, instead of loading up the platform being overwhelmed by 200 indicators, they look at the index, ask the question of why, and then we can break that down into the framework so that users can see the different reasons or components of that vulnerability. So this is an example of that vulnerability index displayed over Australia. And one thing that we did to encourage users to explore that is to provide breakdowns of that vulnerability index. So we have, for example, a region here, which is Brisbane, where we are now, and then a little component of the platform that shows the different components of vulnerability and their underlying data sources. And now because we use, I said before it was a weighted sum, it's a weighted average, but because we use an average, we can consider cases where the data isn't available. And so in other years where some data sources aren't there, rather than having to impute, we can calculate the data using baseline variables and still get a vulnerability index. And so I guess that breakdown in this case shows how the vulnerability index is comprised when there are missing data as well. We also allow for comparisons across space. So this is comparing Brisbane to Sydney, for example, showing the difference in vulnerability. And it allows to explore many variables, but of course can become quite overwhelming if you slap them on. So being able to add them over time or independently or individually allows a user to explore in the same way as the vulnerability index does by looking at it through that breakdown panel. In terms of translation, we've had quite a few opportunities to work with different groups around Australia, including the Western Australian Community of Social Services, the Australian Academy of Social Science, Thriving Kids in Disasters. We've worked with the Inspector General for Emergency Management's office. We were named in the WA Climate Inquiry in 2019 as a developing platform to solve some of these problems in environmental health monitoring. And more recently, we've worked with the Australian Child and Youth Wellbeing Atlas to incorporate our environmental indicators into their digital platform as well. In terms of possible improvements, I mentioned before that there are pros and cons to the indicator setup. And one con to mention is that the variables that we select for the indicator are born of methodology. So we choose indicators that we know work well based on expert opinion and working with advisors. But one thing that's not in that is combinations of interactions, correlations, and so there's more work to be done in terms of what we present in the index or what we present to the public in terms of a single value or a set of indicators so that that's fully representative of the population rather than curated, hand-picked indicators. The other thing here to mention is causal links and associations, being able to communicate those separately. And so we're working with frameworks, indicator frameworks, to be able to do that in more detail. But you'll have to follow the project to find out how we do that in the future.
Thank you, Aiden. You mentioned a whole bunch of organisations and government sectors that would benefit from this. I can also see that it would be just useful for the general public as well. People are often wanting to understand that kind of information about understanding where they want to move to. Particularly useful for people that are moving here from overseas who come to Brisbane having never been here before and really need to kind of grasp the maximum temperature days and the number of heat wave days. Okay, so moving back into human health, our next speaker is Associate Professor Susanna Cramb, who will speak on the Queensland Injury Atlas. Is the AV person available to assist with the... Oh, he's there. Yeah.
I'll keep talking.
Just camouflaged in black.
I'll just yell for the first few slides. It's all good. Does it sound okay? Yes. So I'll keep talking so you can check the volume. And I'll start my talk. So over the last 130 years in Queensland, there's been huge technological advances in how injured patients receive treatment and are transported. We also now routinely collect a lot more data on injured patients. Can everyone clap twice if you actually love data? 1, 2, 3. Oh, you guys are on fire. Love it. I'm in the right room. So we would think that this data would enable us to actually reduce inequities by identifying them first and improve patient care. But in reality, our data is in multiple data sets. So we have our ambulance data, our retrieval services data, which is coordinating all flight retrievals in Queensland, our emergency department, and our hospital admissions, each in its own data set. And so that makes it really hard to follow the patient journey. So our goal with the Queensland Injury Atlas was to actually combine all these data sources, produce a visually informative tool that clinicians, government regulators, and policymakers could actually gain insight from. And so we started with our linked data sets. Initially, we had all hospital admissions for injured patients, and that was linked to our ambulance, emergency department, and compensation schemes. That process took a really long time, a ridiculously long time, in fact. And so initially, the data covered from 2012 to 2017. That's what's still shown, and that's what we'll show you today. But we received a more recent extract recently, which was also including the flight retrievals and deaths linked in as well. And going forward, we'll be focusing just on road injuries. But excitingly, a road injury in any one of these data sets is included, so they don't have to have been admitted to hospital. Now, just before I go in, because the best way to understand the atlas is actually to see it. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of detail in this data. And so what we're presenting today has been slightly altered. While the overall patterns and journeys did happen, the actual dates, times, and demographic characteristics have all been modified just to protect patient confidentiality. So when you enter the atlas, you see a map of Queensland, has red dots representing geo-coordinates of ambulance pickup locations. They can be turned off. The white dots represent each hospital. The size is relative to the number of records associated with that hospital. The default time period is 2016 to 2017, and this chart shows the top 10 specific individual ICD codes for the time period selected. We have over 1.8 million records, and that represents mostly emergency department presentations, but quite a few hospitalizations, and actually encompasses almost 980,000 unique people. Now, our cost is over $4.6 billion, and most of that is actually due to hospitalizations. And the specific ICD code with the greatest cost is clearly this one relating to rehabilitation care. we can select just a specific area, and the size of our hospital facilities change relative to the records for the residents of that area. So here you can see that Longreach and Townsville hospitals are incredibly important. For those not from Queensland, Townsville is the one on the coast in the far north. We can also select specific hospitals. Yes, and you can do that by clicking on the map, or you can select from our drop-down list based on hospital and health service regions. Now here we're going to select Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital. That's a very major hospital here in Brisbane, one of our oldest hospitals. And most of our almost 92,500 records were due to emergency department presentations. But of our 56,300 patients, they come from all over the state. The fewest areas are in the far north, like Port Douglas and Kuranda, but also Shoalwater Bay and even far south. The most number of records are from residents of New Farm, which is very close to the hospital. And our actual ICD codes, the highest one for Royal Brisbane was actually the rehabilitation code again. We can also look at injury type. We have a range of ways you can do this. You can enter a specific ICD code based on diagnosis by typing it in or from the drop-down menu, or you can just select by external cause based on ICD codes as well. We can also look at body region and the nature of the injury. I hope I'm not blocking the view for anybody. And we can actually have these subtype graphs which show the proportion, but we can also switch the order. So if we wanted to look at fractures, and we can pick it of the spine, which is under trunk. And when you select that, it does show the facility size will change. And you can see we have over 10,300 records relating to fractures of the spine. But we can also filter further. So we can look at demographic characteristics and choose just 15 to 19-year-olds. And we can then select males only. And we now have less than 200 records, which means that our event scatter chart is enabled. And this chart shows individual patient records. We have time on the x-axis, cost on the y-axis, individual symbols for ambulance, emergency department, hospital records. The size of that shape represents the length of stay in that facility. We can hover over and get really specific details about each person. If we actually click on a record, it will take us to that location on the map. And so for this specific person, they've spent time in Royal Brisbane Hospital, but also in Caloundra Hospital on the Sunshine Coast. But another way to look at patient journey is just click on an ambulance pickup location. And so for this particular person, by clicking, we have our patient chart enabled. We can go straight to that. They had quite a few records in May 2017, so we can zoom in on that area. And we can see that initially, they were actually collected by ambulance. Then they were taken to the emergency department of Charters Towers Hospital, subsequently admitted to Charters Towers Hospital, but after 8 hours, they were discharged. 1 day later, they presented at the Townsville Emergency Department. 2 days after that, they presented at the Gatton Emergency Department. Townsville is far north, Gatton is just west of Brisbane. This person has covered immense distances in just 2 days. And that's why it's so important we actually have this statewide data to really understand what patients are doing. So there's a lot of information in the atlas. In fact, I've not even shown you all of our filters. We have some more. So you saw the demographic ones. We have our age groups, we have our sex, we also have First Nation status as well. But we can also filter by our event characteristics. And I need to look at this to see. So we can filter by acute injuries, the triage type. We can also look at the exact length of stay time period or a range of cost values. And we may choose to even separate based on our departure separation. So really sadly, we could choose to just focus on the ones who actually died during their hospital care only. We can look at the exact record type, or we can look at whether they were using compensation data at all. Now, how was the atlas developed? So underlying this, we developed an optimized database schema. It was rigorously tested for functionality, performance, scalability, and reliability. And we also had the visualizations formed using CSS3, HTML5, and JavaScript frameworks like React. I don't actually know what most of these things mean. That's outside my skill set. So I hope you all know this song. We will because I'm going to summarise my talk to the song, and I need your help. So now that you all know the song, I need you to sing the chorus at a minimum. We're going to, the words will be up on the screen, there are different words, but sing the chorus. If you want to sing the whole song, you are a legend. If you want to get up and dance, you are a bigger legend in my undying gratitude, and you have been sitting for quite a while, so you may feel the need to move. So here we go, let's get our beat started.
Many people in childhood every day rush to watch and see the hospital stay. Will they survive or will they die? Or get reunited 500 times? Daughter, I need for you to see. Journeys and outcomes with facility. Visualized over time and space, and cost given for each place. Queensland, Indigenous. Queensland, Indigenous. Queensland, Indigenous. Queensland, Indigenous.
Big thanks to Jamison Trauma Institute and Queensland University of Technology for driving this project. I really want to thank Motor Accident Insurance Commission who have funded the project, and also all the Queensland Indirect Atlas team. As you can see, they're rock stars and just the best people to work with. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Susanna. As always, you always leave us with something memorable so that we don't forget what you have presented on. And I'm sorry, James, but now you have to top that effort. So we next have Dr. James Retell from Cancer Council Queensland presenting an Shiny app for us. So if you wish.
How do I get the... Sorry, I don't know what I've done here. I broke it.
Okay.
Great. Hi folks, my name's James. I'm going to talk to you really briefly this morning. Just this morning, about a tool we've been developing to try and help cancer registries and cancer organisations publish and communicate their cancer data and cancer statistics. So before I dive in, just a quick shout out to my collaborators here, Sean Francis, James Rennie and Peter Barty. Their contributions to this project were immense, and I'm really just the messenger up here. So I'll just start with some quick background or context for cancer registries, about cancer registries. I apologise if this is already well known and unnecessary. But cancer registries systematically collect and manage data on cancer cases within a defined population. We have state and territory-based cancer registries in Australia, and there's some 700 or so cancer registries globally. They're an essential tool for describing cancer burden, monitoring trends over time, and identifying cancer disparities across populations and geographies. And critically, they support cancer research, public health planning, and policy development. Key to their success, or we think key to their success, is ensuring that the insights generated from cancer registries and cancer organisations reach audiences who can act on them. So these are audiences like healthcare professionals, policymakers, and the broader public, because it's through these organisations that, it's through these audiences that ultimately behavioural and policy change can come about. So we want our cancer registries to not sort of just be passive data repositories, but active tools in helping to communicate cancer burden and cancer statistics. There are some major barriers, though, to effectively communicating cancer statistics and actioning cancer data and publishing data in an engaging format. Many cancer registries around the world, if not most, operate on very limited financial resources, making it difficult to access proprietary softwares and the specialised expertise that's sometimes required to publish and communicate population-level cancer statistics. As a result, their ability to produce high-quality outputs that inform policy and engage stakeholders can be hamstrung. So some packages do exist, and no doubt you're aware of some of these. These include things like Power BI, Tableau, and there's many other dashboard tools or softwares for sort of displaying population-level information. And these are built for data visualization and dashboard development. However, they often come with licensing fees, which can pose a challenge to smaller or under-resourced cancer registries. And additionally, these general-purpose softwares are not always designed to meet the needs of population-based cancer registries, which are really needing to handle very sensitive data and are aiming to communicate broad cancer trends to non-technical audiences. So we tried to address this gap by developing what we've called CARDO, which stands for Cancer Registry Data Online. And CARDO is an R package for building population-level cancer dashboards using cancer registry data. It's specifically targeted at under-resourced cancer registries who want to communicate or publish their cancer data. The beauty of R, of course, is that it's free, it's open source, it's used for statistical analyses, it's used for data visualization, and it's widely adopted within the research context. Similarly, CARDO is free. We've made it available through GitHub, and it requires only a free installation of RStudio. And although it uses R and RStudio, it requires no coding or R experience to get up and running. It's designed to be user-friendly and accessible to those with no coding experience. Unfortunately, I can't give you a live demo today of just how easy it is to move from a sort of cancer data to generating a live dashboard, because that would require a live session of R, but I just thought I'd like to try and give you a sense of just how sort of simple and easy this package is to use. If you have questions about some of the mechanics or the methods under the hood here, ask me afterwards, but I won't have time to go into that detail during the talk today. So yeah, there is some initial data preparation that's needed. This relates to standardizing your data set, ensuring that you have appropriate data to build a dashboard, so essentially having a minimum data set. In order to set up the dashboard, you need variables such as diagnosis count, so how many cancer cases do you have, some information about age at diagnosis or an age group, and year of diagnosis. And details on how to set up the dashboard are provided through the package as you use it, but also are detailed in a free handbook that we've made available on GitHub that's really quite comprehensive. So once you have your data ready to go, building the dashboard is really, really straightforward, or we hope that it's straightforward. The CARDO package walks you through the process using a guided user interface that looks something like this. So it's really this simple. You load in your data set, you specify some variables, and this relates to marrying the data that the user supplies to the data that we want displayed in the dashboard, and then you specify some level of customization to the dashboard. So this relates to things like potential data sensitivity issues. So a lot of registries have small data sets. They may not have the capability to publish results by yearly, for example. They may need to publish sort of 5-year averages or 3 or 10-year averages or whatever that happens to be. And so we have some customization in that allows the user to do that. And once you've done that customization, you create the dashboard and you get something that looks a little bit like this. So here's an example. This is all fictional cancer data, by the way. This is an example of a diagnosis page that gets generated from a data set that we supplied to the R package. It's on this particular page, you've got all malignant neoplasms. In this particular data set, we've been able to filter by cancer type, so now you're looking at fictional data for colorectal cancer. And we also, in this data set, we fed in some mortality data, so you can see we've also got a deaths page that's in this dashboard. So depending on the data that you have, or the richness of your data set, the dashboard will look a little bit different. Critically, Cardo is secure. This is sort of where we spent 90% of our time, or the sort of hurdle that we had to get over. It was developed in consultation with data custodians and cancer registries to ensure that usability and clarity and data governance compliance. The data loaded into Cardo is stored locally on your computer, and all analyses are performed locally. Any sort of unit record data that you load into this never actually makes contact with the dashboard. It's all sort of all data wrangling and is performed locally on your machine. So sort of just to round things out, we think Cardo is a really good illustration of the opportunities that open source softwares like R present, and I'm sure everyone's fully aware of the benefits of using open source software. But using RStudio and RShiny, we think we've been able to build a dashboard product here that really strips away some of the financial and technical barriers that often block innovation and access. And because Cardo was built in RStudio, it can be really easily expanded to incorporate more detailed cancer statistics. It really just depends on the richness of the data set that you have available. At the Cancer Council Queensland, we've actually developed a sort of scaled up or supercharged version of Cardo that we use to report, to routinely report Queensland cancer statistics. So we call this Queensland Cancer Statistics Online, or QSOL for short, and these are just some screenshots of the dashboard that we've created. We have access to a very rich data set, so we're able to populate the dashboard with quite detailed descriptions or patterns of cancer in Queensland. But this just represents the opportunity or the possibility for Cardo, depending on the data set that you have available to you. The other nice thing about Cardo is, given that it's written in R, if you do have some R experience, it's very easy to actually go into the application or go into the package and just expand on the dashboard itself. So you can take the sort of framework that we set up and then start to customize it or add in your own pages. So just to summarize, Cardo, we think that Cardo, we hope that Cardo lowers the barriers to effective reporting, the effective reporting of cancer statistics, and empowers cancer registries and other organisations to become active contributors to cancer control. By making cancer statistics more accessible, timely and engaging, Cardo enables clinicians, policymakers and advocates to drive evidence-based decisions and improve cancer control and equity. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, James. Before we launch into our panel discussion, I'd just like to thank all of the speakers again. So, if I could invite the speakers on stage, and also Professor Gentry-White, who will lead the remainder of the session, will be a panel discussion and any questions from the audience. And then, yep. So I've just remember to pass the mic around to Gentry.
All right. So that was a very interesting set of talks on sort of designing and using data platforms for really ultimately public good. So yeah, in general, like I said, the three topics we'd like to talk about in this panel, I guess, is using these data platforms for identifying inequalities and making data accessible for action, security, privacy, and trust issues with the data, and issues around impact, translation, and longevity. So I'll start out by asking everyone on the panel a simple question. In one sentence, what inequality does your platform most directly aim to reduce? One sentence, please.
Beyond, I'll make this as long as possible, beyond data access, which is a massive part of the platform, it's to identify populations that are most at risk to a wide array of environmental hazards for intervention.
So really you're talking about reducing inequalities in access to information about those environmental hazards? Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. Jess?
Yeah, the Australian Cancer Atlas is about understanding geographic differences in cancer outcomes, primarily diagnosis rates and survival rates.
I think the inequality we're targeting with CARDO is access to the resources to make use of the data that you have.
So Queensland Injury Atlas would be about identifying inequities in care and outcomes for injured patients.
Okay, so that all sounds pretty good. I guess the other question we're talking about, the first theme was around design and using data platforms to identify inequalities. So we'll delve a little bit more into that. With a bit of a focus on how design choices help identify and communicate inequalities that can be acted on and how accessibility enables meaningful use of data. Did we all follow that question or that statement? Basically looking at how design choices influence how easy it is to identify these inequalities and how this kind of accessibility enables meaningful use of data. So actually I'll say, I'll start with Jess here. Your atlas visualizes spatial cancer inequalities. How do you design or communicate, how do design or communication choices ensure users can correctly interpret and act on those inequalities? And I actually had a bit of a question about that as well. So basically we're looking at avoiding miscommunication and making sure people are understanding the information, I don't want to say correctly, but they're not misinterpreting the information there.
Yeah, okay. So I think I have two sort of main thoughts around that. We have that diverging colour scheme, the red to blue, which really clearly identifies and describes the inequalities. But as noted towards the end of the talk, sometimes just identifying those inequalities isn't enough to motivate change, motivate action. So we're also looking at alternative measures to try to capture that, capture the real impacts of those inequalities. We have another visualization that looks at the number, for example, of cancer diagnoses simultaneously with the rates, and often the areas with high rates actually have low populations and so small numbers, and that really sticks out from the atlas when you visualize both outcomes at once. And it demonstrates that often it's an accessibility problem or a remoteness problem. Then the second part of your question was about making sure that information is correctly understood, and this is a
interpretation, which is what you're getting at there with that answer.
Oh, right. Okay.
No, I think it's a good answer. But yes, go on. Please.
Oh, well, I think that it's really important because there are lots of nuances in the data set. So I talked about survival, and that's quite different to mortality. But often clinicians, for example, don't understand or don't appreciate the differences between survival and mortality and the differences in how they're interpreted. So there's lots of information on the website, and we also try to partner with people who use the data to make sure that the interpretations are accurate.
Spoiler alert. When I was a PhD student, I worked for the Missouri Cancer Registry, and I produced a lot of these kind of mappings and things like that. So my first question was actually, when you do those rates, are those age-adjusted relative rates that you're comparing? So those are age-adjusted, yeah. Because that's one of the big things that if you don't do that, people get really disturbed when they look at retirement communities on the map and think that somehow there's this horrible, some environmental pestilence causing cancer there. when it just has to do with things like demographics and things like that. So yeah, no, so that was actually, yeah, that's always good. That and showing people counts of incidences is always, can be a little bit tricky as well, but okay. So Aiden, Oz in Health is basically an aggregation of complex environmental indicators. And you mentioned this a little bit in your talk about you can end up with so many indicators. It's a challenge to sort of separate the noise from the signal in that case. So when you have that many indicators, what do you do to try and make it a clearer picture, that is, I guess? How do you make the inequities visible while keeping outputs accessible to users with, and again, you'll have users with differing levels of expertise in interpreting these things?
Yeah, thanks. So I think that like the platform targets 3 different types of users. There's researchers who mainly want to use the data in their own projects, the public, which is interested in exploring the data for personal use and understanding, and then decision makers who have a very targeted use for the data, very local compared to near neighbors or the state and for decision-making purposes. And so what we want, I guess, for both the public and the decision makers who are really going to be exploring the data through the interface is to be able to have like user experience, a journey through the data. And I talked about the indices as a lens through that and the pros and cons in terms of shortfalls of curated indicator sets. And so what we're working towards, that I didn't quite go into detail in the talk, is these indicator sets, which go through the driving forces in terms of population change, the pressures they put on the environment. For example, higher populations means more impervious surfaces, roads, buildings, which then leads to changes in the natural hazards in terms of exposure, temperature, increasing with concrete buildings and things like that.
This is from the guy who wants to put AstroTurf on his lawn.
Yeah. So working through the full picture from population to health impact, and then circling back and talking about actions and what a local government member or decision maker can do with that full, I guess, suite of information to make a difference in terms of adaptation, mitigation plans.
Okay. So it's about connecting those indicators to possible actions in that case, is what you're talking about. Okay. So one final thought that I'd like to get some feedback from everybody here is when you're designing these data platforms with an eye towards reducing inequalities, which of these 3 factors is most important? Is it who can see the data, who can use it, or who can act on it? And I'll start with Susanna.
Sure. So honestly, I feel this is a trick question.
Well, there's no right answer, I guess.
Yeah,
all 3 are important.
Yes, they are very important. So obviously, we need to make sure that it's the people who can act can actually interpret the data and understand and use the data effectively. But we need them to see the data to actually make useful actions as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think Jess had mentioned the idea of being findable was important. So James.
What were my options again?
It's who can see the data, who can use it, or who can act on it.
I guess for my specific example, maybe people who can act on it. Okay. The risk of going on a long rant, access to funding is getting harder and harder, and there's been deep cuts, I know in the US to cancer health funding and these kind of things. So I think if you can make cancer registries visible and even just showing basic cancer patterns, I think there's a big upside to engagement and just raising awareness there.
I really couldn't choose one of those. I think, people who can see it, I think I gave examples of all 3 of those. People who can see the data can raise awareness about that data, and then they can communicate it to people who can use it or people who can act on it. But using it and being able to present it in ways that are relevant for specific use cases is also, invaluable. So, all 3.
Okay.
I might add a combination of the 3. People who can interact with the data, which is a big part of I guess the purpose of Oz and Health and all of these other platforms is, yeah, coming back to the idea of data silos and seeing people do these really fantastic studies, and you see it in a static picture in a paper or a report that the government has put together, and you just think like, oh, could I just change this one thing and see what would happen?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think interacting.
Excellent. Okay. So yeah, I guess we're going to shift my focus here a little bit to the ideas around balancing openness, the idea that you want to be able to share the data with an obligation you have to protect privacy and to protect sensitive data. So James, obviously you're the first target here because it looked like you were going to put data up on the internet with that. But Cardo handles the register data locally. So the only thing that gets pushed, to be technical, gets pushed to the Shiny server would be those summary statistics in the graphs and in the figures and so forth, right? So how much of a, what were the disadvantages of having to design the system that way in terms of the simple way to do it was simply be push all the data up to the server, have everything calculated by Shiny, at runtime. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, that's the short version. So we actually did design it in a way that it can handle the unit. So you can put unit record data into it, and that will never make contact with the dashboard. But there's a real challenge there of getting over the optics of if someone doesn't have a lot of experience, or even if they do, they just may not be comfortable putting their unit record file into me. They're just putting it into R, but yeah, they may not be comfortable doing this. So the handbook, or the way we've designed it, is that we ask people to actually pre-cook their data. So they're going to be whatever they put in is what will be displayed in the dashboard. But that has some downsides, at least in the way we've designed it. Initially, it prohibits things like calculation of survival. So this is very much a pilot at the moment. We're still trying to work out demand, but yeah, that's one downside, and we're trying to just work out what are people interested in using this, and what are they willing to how they're willing to engage with it.
Okay. Yeah, and every user, I guess, is going to have different data storage requirements or capabilities in terms of ensuring that kind of security and access that way. So, so Susanna, now you said the injury atlas integrates linked hospital and ambulance data. So I guess the question is, what technical or governance steps were crucial to maintain confidentiality and trust at the fine spatial scales that you're looking at?
I may have forgotten to say this in my talk, but the Queensland Injury Atlas is only available to authorised users.
Okay.
So it does go down to that individual level unit, which clinicians have access to that anyway. But yeah, certain authorised users and other agencies also can access that. But we do, that data is locked down and very securely stored.
Okay. And so, yeah, so basically the data storage would be the technical aspect of it, and then your identification of authorized users would be sort of the governance issues involved. Okay. So I guess for everybody here, beyond technical controls, and this is a good point, James, you sort of alluded to this a little bit, how do you earn social trust from data custodians, communities, or clinicians to make these tools possible? So I guess, Susanna, we'll start with you.
No worries. I think it does take time. Jamison Trauma Institute is actually a very recent institute. It was announced in 2017. I think it started around 2018. But they have experts that are so well recognized in their fields. They're embedded in national committees and international committees. We have clinicians on the team, as well as staff from Queensland Health, as well as epic researchers. I'm not including myself in this list. And so because the people are so respected, and because we've had a lot of meetings with key stakeholders like SSB, which is our Statistical Services branch in Queensland, who do all the data linkage, I think over time they really do come to appreciate the fact that we have high integrity and we are very conscientious when it comes to handling the data, and we only are doing this to have good patient outcomes. And so because of that, we have recently been able to get an agreement with Queensland Health where working with their eHealth team, we now have a platform created where they will actually upload regularly big linked data sets to it. But that took a long time to get to that stage of trust.
The answer specific to me is I don't really know, which was trying to work on that. For Cardo, we did develop it in collaboration with a few, or we got feedback from some data custodians, and the few that we ended up speaking to were comfortable with how we designed it. But yeah, there's some little practical challenges, like at the moment when you the interface actually launches in a browser, and so if you don't have trust in the application, that's an immediate red flag. It looks like you're loading your data basically into a web browser, but that's not what's happening. So there's some little design elements like that we had to do it that way that were frustrating. But yeah, we're still in the sort of pilot stage trying to work out the best way to convince people that they want this and that it's very safe to use.
So it's a lot of education and consistency, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to echo a lot of what Susanna said about building relationships and ongoing communication. I think another thing is starting, and I think Susanna and James have both sort of discussed this, starting small, having prototypes, and then demonstrating that it is safe. And then you can build relationships with further data custodians and add more different indicators or measures to your platform. Yeah, so start small and then build after you've got that trust.
Yeah, I was going to say bringing the end users along with you for the journey, which more or less is what you've both said in terms of starting small and building up. I think one of the big things for Oz and Health too, in terms of long-term sustainability, is building on trusted resources and reducing repetition. So again, I guess going back to the data siloing idea, if we can leverage data sets and pre-curated data sets from other data custodians rather than repeating that process ourselves, then we're all for that. If there are indicators that are pre-existing and we can build on those, then not only do we get to say, here's another indicator in the platform, but we get to say, this comes from a trusted existing resource. So using data from trusted data custodians like ABS, Bureau of Meteorology, CSIRO, helps us.
You'll skip the last bit? Okay. Well, yeah, I guess we're going to start wrapping up here. No, so really, the overall theme there really is about building trust and these personal relationships, which are sort of these soft skills that we don't really think about very much for technical people anyway. So I find that interesting. So we're going to wrap it up because we are running out of time. I'd like to open the questions to the audience now at this point. Is there anyone in the audience with any questions? I'm wearing my reading glasses, so I can't really see. You'll need to wave your hand high if you do. Oh, Helen's got a question. All right, good.
Susanna, so I didn't realise that the Injury Atlas had kind of restricted access. So is it like what is the process of accessing that? Is that kind of quite challenging? Like, do people have to apply for ethics approvals and things?
No, we haven't actually opened it so basically this started as a research project, so everyone on that research team had access, and that covers a diverse range of departments and organisations. But our hope now is we're working towards embedding it within the Queensland health systems and even making it like a business as usual application, so all the clinicians will have access to it, and then people from other agencies will be able to apply to have access. But we're not yet at that point, but I will let you know as soon as we are.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions from the audience? Any questions online? There are no questions online. One question in the audience. All right, let's trudge on over here. Oh, here we go. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ali Darwish from University of Queensland. Thank you so much for your incredible presentation and very amazing dashboards. My work involves lots of dashboarding, but in education, not health. But I'm wondering if you use any UX UI design in your work, or how do you at the end of the work collect users' feedback on your design or improve it based on their feedback? And I have one other question from Aiden, but do you want me to ask it now? Or?
Yeah, go ahead.
About that index, I'm interested to know how do you calculate the weights, and how do you at the end evaluate the effectiveness of your index?
Okay, so who would like to field this questions? Questions about feedback on the, I guess, the user interface, and specific question, I know for Aiden, but I don't know, James, did you want to speak to any of that, or any of you?
I'll jump in first,
okay,
just really quickly, because I think Jess would have the best answer. But so with the Incident Atlas, like in developing, we have lots of workshops with key stakeholders who want to use it to make sure we're actually going to include what they really need and want to have there. And then like because we've actually had a few different phases, we had the Atlas, the alpha phase, then we had the beta phase, and now working on gamma, which is almost complete. And so each time we kind of finish a phase, we then have more workshops. This is what we've done. What do you think? What's bad? What's good? What's hopeless? And just really try and iteratively improve. But it's always with the usability and relevance in mind.
I was going to say that Susanna would have the best answer. Workshops and focus groups, I think. But also getting feedback from people who've used it. You know, people who we know have used it, they give us feedback, so that's invaluable, yeah.
Yeah, so in our case for Oz and Health, we're working with a software development group, NGIS, who is running things like user journey mapping workshops, where they run users through what kind of things they would like to see in the platform and how they would like to see that in user interface examples and things like that. And then revisiting that, producing first instance prototypes and getting feedback to develop that iteratively. In terms of the index, so the weights that I mentioned in our pilot index are generated using pairwise correlation with each component and all-cause mortality. But that's tricky because there's concerns or questions around if you're using a response all-cause mortality, why don't you pivot then and use a full-on statistical model? And the trick, I think, with our case in environmental health is that when you're talking about health outcomes and exposures, then the links are really epidemiological, and so the model restrictions are quite complex there in terms of what you can fix and what you can change. So if we're looking for direct causal relationships, then we couldn't include all 30 parameters because that adds a wild amount of variation. And so the index, or to call it a composite indicator, is supposed to indicate then how all of these factors come together. And again, I raised the questions or issues with multi-collinearity and things like that, where we need to explore ways how these different parameters that are going into the index, how they interact as well. And we'll keep doing that in the future. In terms of how we assess the value of the index, in that case, because we were using all-cause mortality, it's as easy as comparing multiple methods and then looking at not only the index correlation with all-cause mortality, but then the overall index result and comparing that with all-cause mortality across methods. And so we use principal component analysis, which is a very common index method. We used just an equal rank sum method, and then we used our all-cause correlation method. And that's the one that came out on top and is in the publication. But in the future, we're exploring other nonlinear methods as well, and also Bayesian methods, where we can see how decisions funnel through, because that helps with interpretability as well. Thanks.
Okay, excellent. Let's give a big thanks to our panel members and organizers for this this session, and we'll call that lunch then.